What's up guys, hello to Footballtalk here, back in YouTube after putting up my first written piece in a month, since I previously was knee deep in my 8-part divisional draft and roster review series, where I went back and forth between the NFC and AFC, analysing every single draft pick made by each team and what it means within the context of what they've done this offseason. If you want to learn more about roster construction of the league as a whole, or even just your favorite team, I highly recommend checking it out. I added timestamps for each team. Now that leads us into this 2-part project, where I once again go through all 32 teams, only now asking what we still don't know, pivotal questions I have as I project forward to the upcoming season, whether that's a specific position I'm not sure about, how the depth chart will be figured out, some schematic detail, maybe how certain responsibilities are allocated, really anything. Just real quick before we get things started, let me ask you to please like the video if you enjoy the analysis, and I encourage you to hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Obviously it won't cost you anything, but it will really help me out and only takes you a second. Thanks. And since I started with the NFC North and worked my way around the compass to the West in this past video series, we'll go reverse order this time around, even though we'll stick with the alphabetical order within those divisions, meaning first up are the Arizona Cardinals, and for them my question is, does the new talent on defense make some of the exotic ideas they have work? This time around last year, I asked what this coaching staff could do with better/more pieces to work with, since they already did some interesting things with Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis on defense, originally coming in alongside Drew Petzing as their OC a couple of years ago, even if it didn't end up materializing in the numbers. Then during this past season, they showed signs of legitimately being a problem to deal with, and I even made a video called How the Cardinals Have Become NFL Bullies, after they won 4 straight games to enter the bye week with a 6-4 record. Of course they went on to lose 5 of the next 6, before closing out with a meaningless Week 18 game, and people were kinda clowning me on the title, although I referred more so to the type of style that they played, big personnel on offense, and at-you gap scheme heavy run game, the situational awareness to force the issue on defense, stuffing early down runs, and then throwing the kitchen sink at quarterbacks in drop-back situations. Opponents adjusting to those tendencies, some injuries along the lineup, and shooting themselves in the foot massively hurt their success. Now with another loaded draft class, signing free agents Josh Sweat, Dalvin Tomlinson, and even bringing back Calais Campbell to the desert for season 18 for him, they brought in some veteran leadership that they were previously lacking. Last year's first round pick Darius Robinson is set for a healthy season after logging less than 200 snaps as a rookie. 14th overall pick Walter Nolan from Ole Miss brings a disruptive quality on the interior, and they grabbed what I consider a top 10 prospect in Michigan corner Will Johnson round 2 due to dealing with turf toe. I believe there's a lot to like with their willingness to tap into these exotic ideas, especially in defined passing situations, and I'm looking forward to seeing if this mix of guys can make those work and provide them some level of stability. As we transition to the Los Angeles Rams, and for them I'm wondering how much will Sean Payton tap into 12 personnel packages. I had one question for each side of the ball written down for these guys. Defensively I'm wondering if the linebackers on this roster hold back the potential of that unit, because their young front could be truly dominant if a couple of members among it can take another step forward this year. I'm even more interested in the evolution we see from the offense however, because Sean McVay showed such strong ties to the Shanahan coaching tree in his philosophies early on, although he implemented distinctive elements for his part, such as the constant threat of the ball being handed off in fly sweeps. And the big difference to previous iterations of that system was that it did pretty much all of it out of 11 personnel sets. I couldn't find public data from one source on the exact rates early on during the tenure, but they consistently found themselves at the top of the league, and they were 90% until this past season, when that mark went down to 81.2%. The last couple of years we saw a drastic shift in how they chose to run the ball however, going away from the previous wide zone meta, which they helped popularize across the league, to being one of the duo heaviest teams in the NFL, where the focus is to create double teams and move the line of scrimmage vertically. So when LA traded out of round 1 this past April, before targeting former Oregon tight end Terrence Ferguson, that was an indicator for them changing course to some degree yet again, which they have been alluded to somewhat watching the draft room clips. The wide receivers have always been heavily involved as part of the run game, only going away from providing a horizontal threat to being deployed more as insert blockers and cracking back inside. But looking at how Puka Nacua does a lot of his damage at the catch point and on crossers, where play action is supposed to negate the impact of the defense's second level anyway, while Devontae Adams is a great isolation receiver, being able to condense the defense as you tap into more 2 tight end sets, and what it also does for your pass game isn't a negative, while it theoretically provides you a better blocker at the point of attack, and you can still sub on 2 to Atwell if you want to hit one of those deep shots off heavy run fakes. Next up, the San Francisco 49ers, and for them the question is, can the young receivers allow this drop-back pass game to thrive as more of a separate entity? Closer to the opposite end of the spectrum, Kyle Shanahan's troops have been one of the most efficient units in the league on an annual basis, thanks to the versatility out of the 21 personnel, depth lineup packages, and the way they could punish opponents with it on the ground especially. So many of the explosive plays through the air were a result of them being able to hit targets on the run off play action, and the incredible yards after catch skills of those guys. However, the big shift we saw out of them recently, and especially this past season when Christian McCaffrey was never truly available for his usual self. For all of you don't have to run the ball effectively to have success on play action truthers, is going away from that approach and putting a bigger focus on more of a traditional West Coast style dropback attack, still to some degree with a fullback on the field, but generally more spread out. The main piece in that, of course, is the trust Shanahan has in Brock Purdy compared to who was previously on the center, hence why they just handed him that big extension for as much of a team-friendly deal as it actually was when you dig into the structure. When you look at their success rate until Brandon Ayuk got hurt, there's definitely merits to that way of operating, with Purdy's ability to be a quick rhythm distributor and the extra space it affords him to show off his talents extending plays. Now the question becomes if some of the young guys can step up to make it work after they decided to move on from Deebo Samuel for a 5th round pick. Ricky Pearsall showed off some real flashes after literally being shot before his rookie campaign even started, especially in those option routes, whips or returns, often off motion. But can Jacob Cowing, who they drafted a few rounds later last year, be more than an occasional target on deep shots? And after drafting Ole Miss's Jordan Watkins in round 4 this year, can his ability to execute more complex routes on those longer downs be an element added to the mix? And lastly, in the NFC West, the Seattle Seahawks. Did they do enough to turn around this O-line, and is it an environment that Sam Darnold feels comfortable in? It's no mystery why the Seahawks offense took a step back this past season. Sure, Geno Smith didn't have his best year by any means, but I would like everyone questioning his level of play to go back and watch the crumbling pockets he was working with on a consistent basis, if not straight up free runners charging in on him, somewhat trying to stand in deliver passes down the field. Seattle finished 24th in PFF run and 26th in pass blocking grade in 2024. Abe Lucas at right tackle missing more than half the season yet again was a major factor, but the guys they started with on the interior were borderline unplayable. They literally had Connor Williams retire midway through the year, and despite Charles Cross and Laken Tomlinson both starting all 17 weeks, 8 other guys logged at least 167 snaps on the O-line. Despite that, the Hawks didn't address that unit at all via free agency or trades until the draft rolled around. That's when they used the 18th overall pick in North Dakota State's Ray Zabel, who at the Senior Bowl showcased his incredible positional versatility, lining up at all 5 spots across the front after excelling at both ends of the line for the Bison previously, and he dominated throughout the week prior to an excellent combine performance. Him allowing new OC Clint Kubiak to get the best 5 out there, and even in season having the flexibility to not have to shuffle everyone around in case of an injury is a major piece. Yet they need both Olu Oluwatimi in his 3rd season, who replaced Williams at the pivot after he stepped away, and Christian Haynes a year after being selected in round 3, making up the bottom end of the previously mentioned snap total to step up. How that unit comes together, how much more success they can find in Kubiak's outside zone oriented run scheme, and if they're able to protect Sam Darnold from his worst tendencies when he's not comfortable in that space back there, will be the biggest factors in if they can be a respectable playoff level team potentially this season. Moving along now with the NFC South, again starting with the letter A, the Atlanta Falcons, and the everlasting question for them, will this pass rush finally be a real factor? Many teams have that one position group that they struggle to solve, even as they continue to pump resources into it. The Browns' rotating cast of quarterbacks through the years comes to mind, for example, yet maybe not a long-term issue feels more desperate than the Falcons trying to find guys who can consistently get to the passer, especially off the edge. Grady Jarrett was a highly underrated player in Atlanta for a lengthy period of time, but outside of one out last season by Vic Beasley, where the sack total wasn't truly indicative of how much pressure he'd apply on a game-by-game basis, the name that is typically evoked as the last guy who consistently flirted with double-digit quarterback takedowns is Jonathan Abram, who left Atlanta in 2012. To some degree, you can absolutely critique them for the decisions they made personnel-wise, but you can't blame them for not trying to fill that void. Re-signing Beasley back in the day didn't work out. Tag McKinley, Marlon Davidson, and Alan David all haven't hit his top 50 picks, and they addressed the D-line with the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks last year. Yet, with the offense mostly set, Thanks to the first rounders they've invested along the lineup, you expected them to go back to the defense for Raheem Morris and his new DC Jeff Ulbrich. To give up an extra first rounder next year and double down on the pass rush specifically was yet another aggressive move by the general manager Terry Fontenot, which I've questioned before how happy they were to part ways with the draft capital. But Georgia's Jalen Walker and Tennessee's James Pierce Jr. were two of the biggest playmakers in the SEC over the last couple of years. I'm interested in how exactly they deploy all these pieces, with Walker in particular having been such a chess piece in offense already, where he can rush from various alignments and angles. Leonard Floyd has been a pretty consistent number 2, who is very comfortable dropping into coverage. So how willing Ulbrich is to adapt some of the simulated pressures his head coach made hay with previously, with the guys they have capable of peeling off the line of scrimmage, how much ABKD and the rookies factor in on third downs, with maybe more of a hockey lineup switch approach due to the bigger buys they have inside. Those are things I'm very interested in. Transitioning to a team that has done far less recently to turn around the defensive woes, my question for the Carolina Panthers is, can Ejiro Evero get enough out of this defense to be more than just a competitive team? I get if you have questions about what the ultimate ceiling is for a quarterback like Bryce Young, who simply has some physical limitations, but I'm just ready to buy into what he showed over the second half of last season after getting benched, because he was able to challenge some of the top teams in the league despite an underwhelming collection of pass catchers and some horrendous drops by those guys. Continuing to build on that and the ascending run game with more space provided to them, now with a legit number 1 X receiver in 8th overall pick Tetero McMillan in place, I feel good about that side of the ball. The defense, however, remains sort of a mess personnel wise. Derrick Brown on the interior line and JC Horn out of corner can be legit difference making players in the lineup at the best, but otherwise you're largely hoping for fringe starter quality of performances. Free agent Jerome Merrick, I believe, is a quality safety who provides good range and angles from depth to limit explosive plays, while the combination of Bobby Brown and Tershawn Wharton should at least help them defend the run on early downs and free up Derrick Brown to deal with less traffic on a snap-to-snap basis as a traditional nose. I don't mind the day 2 draft gambles on Texas A&M's Nick Scorton and Ole Miss's Princely Uman Mielen on the edges, while Ohio State's Lathan Ransom could end up starting for them as more of an enforcer type who can play closer to the ball as a safety. But none of these guys up front I'd regard as proven commodities rushing the passer. The second level of Jack Thompson looks underwhelming, and at least the other 2 corner spots are highly questionable to me. So this being year 4 for Ejiro Evero as a DC, the third in Carolina, despite any lack of growth and a coaching change last offseason, oftentimes marked by injuries to be fair, he has a lot to prove. Next up, the New Orleans Saints, and for them the question is, how much of a priority is winning this year for the people in charge? This is a very different approach to looking at a team because this is far less about a specific unit or some schematic transformation. We know that Kellen Moore is taking over the reins after experiencing different levels of success as an offensive coordinator. He brought in Doug Nussmeier, who elevated from a position of QB coach, and Brandon Staley, who had an unceremonious exit from the Chargers as the head coach a couple of years ago before laying low as an assistant and defensive advisor for a year in San Francisco. As his 2 coordinators, their general manager Mickey Loomis has never seen a veteran contract he didn't want to restructure, and Ed Voidius too, even as the roster has continued to age defensively, while they recently prioritized investing high draft picks into the offensive line. So with how this offseason had gone until May 10th, it seemed like they were sort of on track once again to be doomed for mediocrity, even though the bottom sort of fell out midway through this past season. Yet with the sudden retirement of Derek Carr, who reportedly had been dealing with lingering issues with his thrown shoulder, which would require additional surgery, the timeline seems to have been altered, and you're most likely looking at a high 2nd round pick in Tyler Shuck from Louisville, while last year's 5th rounder Spencer Rattler and the center. Chris Olave's career feels sort of hanging in the balance due to reoccurring concussion issues. Alvin Kamara was extended during last season, but is now in his 30s at running back. You like what they've built on the O-line, but Demario Davis and Tyrann Mathieu as 36 and 33-year-olds, respectively, as the voices of that defense, and many of the younger players yet to establish themselves full in the league. With how they've handled roster decisions, you'd think this organization is never content with deliberately taking a step back, but the son of the OC, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, is projected to be a top 10 pick next April. The nephew of a franchise legend in Texas' Arch Manning will have a major decision on hand if he delays coming out the year after, when the draft is actually located in New Orleans. I just want to know how much that's in the back of their minds, and how willing they are to just ride it out with the guys they have now in place. Finally, for the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Bucks, and I'm wondering, what does the construction of the secondary look like exactly? Clearly the Bucks are willing to pay a hefty sum of money to retain Liam Cohen as the offensive coordinator. and they'll once again be challenged with replacing that position after just 1 year. Once the guy hopped on a plane back to Jacksonville, when he metaphorically already held the pen to sign his contract extension, Josh Grissom will be tasked with helping them at least come close to again finishing 5th in offensive DVOA, but at least he still has all the pieces in place to do so. Defensively, Todd Bowles and Larry Foote have retained most of the schematic principles, as they've seen names come in and out of the lineup. Vita Vea, Lavonte David, Antoine Winfield Jr., and Jamel Dean are the only 4 guys who have stuck around for them since winning the Super Bowl 4.5 years ago by now. We'll have to see if Hassan Reddick can bounce back and be a legit speed threat off the edge for them, but they've definitely reloaded the defensive front with young pieces. How exactly it fits the other names around Winfield on the back end is what I'm wondering about. Dean hasn't quite lived up to the contract that they handed to him 2 years ago, and I won't rule him out from moving him at some point, but I'd expect him to be locked in into one of those corner spots, using the pair of Tate 2 selections in Notre Dame's Benjamin Morrison and Kansas State's Jacob Parrish indicates that the other jobs are probably more up for grabs though. Doubling down a corner, with Parrish heavily factoring into the plans at the nickel spot. We've heard about how they may be looking to move last year's 3rd rounder Tyke Smith back to deep safety more regularly. Does Morrison look like one of the best cover guys in college football again, like he did in 2023, and beat out a playmaker with certain falls inside McCollum? Do they run a more traditional small nickel package, or does anyone else step up to make them comfortable to largely keeping Tyke down low? Let's head east now with the Dallas Cowboys, and for them my question is this team strong enough in the trenches again to battle the NFC's best? I know we like to make fun of the Cowboys at times with some of the disappointing playoff exits, where they were outmatched in one area, oftentimes unable to stop some of the top 5 rushing attacks by the NFC competition they were facing at the time. And I don't think anyone with a clear mind on this is truly excited about the move from Mike McCarthy to the offensive coordinator that was already in place and Brian Schottenheimer calling the shots now. In part because they previously had gone 12-5 in 3 straight seasons under McCarthy, with a strong combination of quarterback, offensive line, and disruptive potential on defense with a strong pass rush. Lately, not only did they struggle to defend the run due to lighter personnel packages and how opposing play callers were able to take advantage of some of the rules, but they simply weren't the same up front offensively. Drafting Tyler Smith, Tyler Guyton, and just now Tyler Booker in the 1st round these last 3 years is a clear sign that they want to go back to the old days when that unit was truly dominant. I'm glad that they decided it made more sense to keep Smith at guard, but we have yet to see if Guyton can be a locked-in starter on the blind side, looking at the pressure numbers and the fact he was flagged 18 total times as a rookie on less than 700 total snaps. Booker meanwhile showed some athletic limitations at the combine, but is someone you don't want to get into a wrestling arena against. Meanwhile defensively, they tried to address nose tackle of Marcy Smith in round 1 a couple of years ago, but he has yet to establish himself as a bona fide starter, while they just extended Ozo Odigizua. Can some of the late rounders like Ajay Toya from UCLA feature into that rotation? And they've not drafted guys on the edge across from Micah Parsons in the 2nd round in 3 straight years. As long as you can truly challenge Philly up front, you're not in the running for this division. Moving on to the New York Giants, and for them, what's the actual plan of quarterback, and when could we see it shift? Everyone loves quarterback talk, and here's a team where that's a major topic of discussion for how competitive these Giants may be, even if the options aren't super exciting. Tommy Cutlets DeVito is still hanging around, although it feels like he's viewed as QB4 heading into training camp, but otherwise that room was completely overhauled. First they signed Jameis Winston to what very much looks like a low-end backup deal, followed by Russell Wilson for 1 year at $10.5 million, before trading back into the late 1st round for Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss. Based on how GM Joe Shane and head coach Brian Daboll have approached this post-Daniel Jones era, it very much feels like Russ is supposed to be the adult in the room who can take advantage of some of the things this offensive staff in Mike Kafka can do play calling wise, although we've seen that he'll always try to somewhat mold things into the Russ system, and there's a certain limitation to that. He's willing to take vertical shots outside the numbers, but he's never attacked the middle of the field like most of the successful guys around the league have. Jameis of course would bring a high level of volatility with his uber aggressive decision making, while Dart is a major projection from an offense in Lane Kiffin that rarely required him to be an advanced decision maker with an insane amount of RPOs and clean looks off play action. The G-men are facing an extremely difficult schedule and a murderous stretch to start the season, but they'll probably be favored just once in the first 12 games. Consequently, you'd think they'd side with not throwing Dart to the Wolves and making him build up damaging scar tissue this early, but at the same time this whole regime is already in the hot seat. So do they have this mapped out to a certain degree? Is ownership already involved in those decisions, or will they interfere at some point? That's all to be seen still, because I believe that defense under Shane Bowen has a chance to wreak some havoc. For the Philadelphia Eagles, much simpler here, can someone step up at the number 2 corner spot? Even if I believe it's still fair to bring up what the conversation around Jalen Hurts sounded like prior to the NFC Championship and Super Bowl, they definitely said a quarterback and basically only concern themselves with champagne problems at this point. Probably no other team is as strong in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Even if they have to reload to a certain degree, their skill position group is an embarrassment of riches. And last week, I laid out why I thought they had the most improved linebacker group compared to last season, not taking the Kobe Dean injury into account. You can read that piece over at hellosforfootballtalk.com, by the way, the link is down below. With Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean immediately being impact starters outside and in respectively, they were willing to move on from another veteran Darius Slay at corner, but now there's probably a full-fledged competition happening for that second spot out wide. Other than bringing over Adoree Jackson from his division rival Giants, whose contract had become more of an albatross on the hands, they basically didn't address corner at all. There's a world where second round pick Andrew McCooper from Texas is on the field a lot in those free safety packages as a slot, while DeJean moves out to the perimeter, but to maximize his level of physicality and smarts, you want him closer to the ball. So you're basically looking at the 4th rounder Keely Ringo and the UDFA and Eli Riggs from a couple of years ago to compete with the veteran for that job, who played less than 150 combined snaps last season, which the latter was dealing with some injuries and trying to make it off the practice squad. On the surface, with how many 2-high looks they present and play zone coverage out of those, one weak spot doesn't make a unit vulnerable, but clever offensive play callers will be able to play around with match rules to a certain degree and find ways to attack it, if that remains a question for them once they kick off the season. Closing out the East, with the team that surprised a lot of people last season by going all the way to the NFC title game, the Washington Commanders, and for them my question is, does this new tackle duo make Cliff Kingsbury feel comfortable about incorporating more of a drop-back pass game? Which again, maybe more of a niche topic here, despite there being real questions I believe about this defense still. They very much had their peaks and valleys, finishing outside the top 20 in both DVOA and DP per play as a group, where other than second round corner Trey Amos, the big veteran additions are names like Javon Kinlaw, Dietrich Wise, Will Harris and Jonathan Jones. Still, since I expect them to be fighting for average anyway, I'm more interested in seeing how close the other side of the ball under Cliff Kingsbury can come to repeat the success from 2024, when they were top 6 in both those analytical categories. At its core, their approach was pretty simplistic, as they would hurry up the tempo with a heavy dose of RPOs and screen alerts if the defense provided them numbers advantages one way, and a few run concepts they could check into without getting into an actual huddle. The key of course was Offensive Rookie of the Year Jaden Daniels, being such an accurate pass on vertical shots, much more of a willingness to attack the middle of the field than he had showed at LSU, and what he added with his legs, delivering a myriad of backbreaking third down scrambles to extend drives, along with an insane and basically unrepeatable 87% fourth down conversion percentage. That ability to just erase spies and be pursued when he got out wide certainly boosted those numbers, but Jaden had plenty of success in defined passing situations with his arm, essentially trading a 2nd, 3rd and 7th rounder for former Texan Larry Tunsil, and then spending their own late first on Oregon's Josh Connolly Jr. to me was a sign that they're aware that they'll need to show some evolution away from the early approaches by Cliff in order to not get stagnant and opponents to have better answers in year 2 with a target on the backs. Standard right guard Sam Cosmi won't be available for most of 2025, but having those bookends to take edge rushers onto wider tracks and provide the young QB more expansive pockets will be key in taking the next step, as they probably put more on his plate, even if they added Deebo Samuel as more of a yak specialist without big time route runners outside of Terry. As we transition to the NFC North, I will admit that I'm sort of taken off the piece that I wrote last week already when I asked for the Chicago Bears, can this interior trio on the O-line go from abomination to a legit difference-making unit? The Bears were an off-season darling a year ago, with all this hype around the supposedly best supporting cast ever for a number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams, due to the wide receiver talent primarily, although I've been questioning who else they had in the backfield with him, and the 5 guys in front of him was absolutely fair in the moment already, and both, but especially the latter, reared its ugly head. I feel very comfortable predicting Dennis Allen leading Chicago's defense to a big rebound season, as long as a couple of the guys up front step on the pass rush department. Yet for as bad as the lows of the Caleb experience were, when he tried to get into hero ball mode and immediately wanted to create out of structure. I can't stress enough how poor the offensive designs were under Shane Waldron before they promoted Thomas Brown to offensive coordinator in his place, wanted to make him jump another step as the interim head coach, which obviously took away from his ability to work with the rookie QB and focus on schematic details on a day-to-day basis. Bringing over Ben Johnson from Detroit and surrounding him with a veteran staff, outside of the new OC by name in Declan Doyle, I have a lot of trust that the bones for a massive turnaround are in place. The main question for me is how much the interior of the offensive line will ultimately be upgraded, considering they were an even bigger black mark in 2024. We saw plenty of individual mishaps, but miscommunication and a lack of cohesion to execute combination blocks at a high level and picking up twists or games involving the second level were constant issues. Just last week I chose these Bears as the most improved O-line in the league because the singular pieces they acquired, Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson and Drew Dahlman, have all established themselves at least as quality starters for multiple years now. How well exactly they work in concert and make their presence felt collectively is yet to be seen, however. Sort of as a continuation of that, for the Detroit Lions, my question is, what do we see from the successors at both of the coordinator positions? As I expressed on social media 3 weeks ago when the news broke, losing an all-pro level center in Frank Ragnow to retirement is massive, and its ripple effects will be felt heavily. In combination with two of the top coordinators on either side of the ball, in the aforementioned Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, makes the departure of the player who probably represented everything they were about better than anyone else on the roster even more impactful. Figuring out how to put together that interior three on their part, with Graham Glasgow, Christian Mahogany, and rookie state wide legend Miles Frazier, will be key in trying to remain near the top of the conference. Even more pivotal, however, will be the job those two figures coordinating the offense and defense each do. John Morton comes over from Denver as the passing coordinator of the prior 2 seasons, but Sean Payton has been commonplace for that group during his tenure, and Morton has otherwise only been an OC for 1 year in the NFL, the most unforgettable Luke McCown-led 2017 Jets. Meanwhile, defensively, they decided to promote in-house with former linebackers coach Kellen Shepard, who prior to his 4 years in that position, finished his playing career in Detroit, took 1 season off, and then spent another year as Director of Player Development at his alma mater LSU. He has never been tasked with play calling at any level. These are massive shoes to fill for both men. Ben Johnson is one of the most innovative offensive designers in the game, with a tremendous feel for flow of the game, stacking calls on top of one another, and throwing in the occasional trick play. Aaron Glenn, on the other hand, helped turn around one of the worst defenses in the league from a few years ago, without the greatest individual talent at times, implementing a set of rules and communication that led to the secondary offering very little air in the coverages, and helped them overcome a myriad of injuries for the most part this past season. Thankfully, they were able to keep most of their veteran staff of assistants together, including O-line coach Hank Fraley, to help the unit navigate the loss of 2 high-quality starters in sight. That brings us to the Green Bay Packers, and for them my question is, how does the utilization and distribution of opportunities for this receiving corps look like? I struggle with concisely summing up the 2024 season, because they undoubtedly showed growth on defense and the new coordinator Jeff Hafley, despite the front four not being able to consistently get to the passer, and his group of corners looks more questionable heading into next season than previously, with Nate Hobbs at nickel being the only true veteran addition of note, and Jair Alexander released a good week ago. Meanwhile, the offense anecdotally took a slight step back, but really as you look at success rate and EP per play, those were almost identical to 2023, while the raw yards and points were actually up. That's despite Jordan Love being banged up for most of the year and elusive of the ball in his decision making, even though they did find more consistency on the ground with Josh Jacobs, and yet the ceiling for this group felt more defined. Despite what head coach Matt LaFleur said coming into 2024, how they don't need or even want a clear number 1 receiver in order to be tougher to prepare for, it was sort of an up and down experience in who they could feature on a weekly basis, and Jacobs himself expressed this offseason how they did need that established alpha guy. I wouldn't say that they went on to acquire such a presence, but in rounds 1 and 3 of the draft, these are like the Texas Matthew Golden and TCU's Savion Williams. Both of them are valued about a round later personally, but I'm not going to deny the loose movement skills as a route runner and the vision with the ball in his hands for Golden, or the incredible size speed profile for Williams as a gadget-style weapon. Even if Christian Watson misses most of the final year of his rookie deal, which I've outlined in my big draft recap, how those 2 names collectively could replace most of Watson's skill set, that's now a pretty crowded room. So as we go along with training camp, could they make someone like a Dotavian Wicks or Roman Dobbs available? Does Mecole Hardman even make this roster? How does this rotation look like exactly? Do they construct certain packages or sub on guys for specific plays? a lot of options and heavy competition for opportunities. And the final team for today, the Minnesota Vikings. Pretty obvious here for me. Can JJ McCarthy help them truly realize the franchise's championship potential? We'll get back to quarterback one more time here, which I understand is a little on the nose of course. I'd love to go deep into offensive and defensive systems and philosophize about the next little wrinkles we may see, because Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores are two of the premier play callers and strategists in all of football. But ultimately, with the reinforcements in the trenches on both sides of the ball, I have plenty of confidence that they'll continue to grow their approach to stay ahead of the competition, and the first-year starter quarterback truly has one of the best setups we've ever seen from a guy in that position. But what can we expect from JJ McCarthy after missing his entire rookie campaign with a torn meniscus, yet having learned the ins and outs of this offense and taken a heavy dose of mental reps? Myself, I had a mid-2 grade on JJ coming out of Michigan and had him last among the 6 QBs selected in the top 12. He displayed generally strong fundamentals, the arm talent to access most areas of the field, although he really struggled throwing to his left, had plenty of experience in the pro-style, play-action heavy offense that required him to turn his back to the defense, showed no hesitation attacking the middle of the field, and is a plus athlete who can punish opponents for leaving an escape lane open for him. At the same time, the trajectory of his deep passes outside the numbers was a little off. He needed to fix a tendency of overstriding on the release, his eye balance required more improvement, not lead ancillary zone defenders to the ball. I thought he drifted a lot in the pocket, and the Wolverines' offense really struggled to just move the ball for stretches against top defenses. He looked pretty damn good in last year's preseason, and there were questions about how he may actually beat out Sam Darnold for the starting gig, who ended up exceeding basically all expectations. But we have yet to see what he truly looks like when the bullets are flying, and he's put in charge of leading what I would classify as Super Bowl ready operation. But that's gonna do it for the first half of this little mini series. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting the thumbs up button and the bell if you want to stay up to date with everything I put out here on YouTube. As I referenced a couple of times already, I published an article on the most improved position groups across the NFL this offseason last week. You can find that and all of my content over at HelloSoFootballtalk.com, which I added the link to the description here. Along with that, you can check out my previous 8-part video series, where over the course of 6 hours total, I broke down the draft classes and off seasons of all 32 NFL teams. That should pop up in the top right corner any second now, and if you're interested in what I have to say about your favorite squad, I added timestamps for each of them. I'll be back a week from now with the AFC version of this, and hope to have you along for it. So until then, see you later, peace!